My name is Jessica, and I'm about to tell you the most heartbreaking story of my life. Picture this. You're gasping for air, clutching your chest in agony, begging your own family for help while they're more concerned about getting the perfect wedding photo. That was me 3 months ago, dying slowly while my parents chose cake over their daughter's life.
Ow.
What happened next will shock you, but the revenge that followed, that's something I never could have planned, even from beyond the grave. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I should have known something was wrong when I woke up that morning with a strange tightness in my chest. As a third-grade teacher at Lincoln Elementary, I was used to the stress that came with managing 28 energetic 8-year-olds. But this felt different. The sensation was like someone had wrapped a rubber band around my lungs and was slowly tightening it with each breath I took. But today wasn't about me. Today was Caroline's wedding day, and in the Chen family, Caroline's needs always came first. My sister Caroline had been planning this day for 2 years, ever since Tyler proposed to her on a beach in Santorini with a ring that cost more than my annual teaching salary. The venue was Willowbrook Country Club in Riverside, Connecticut, a place so exclusive that my parents had to put down a deposit equivalent to 3 months of my rent just to book it. The theme was Enchanted Garden. Caroline had insisted on white roses imported from Ecuador and fairy lights that cost more per strand than I spent on groceries in a week. I stood in the bridal suite, watching Caroline get her makeup done by a team of 3 professionals while sipping champagne that cost $200 a bottle. Even in her silk robe with her hair in rollers, she looked like she belonged on the cover of a magazine. Caroline had always been the golden child, the daughter who could do no wrong. Valedictorian in high school, full scholarship to Yale, now a successful marketing executive in Manhattan, pulling in 6 figures while I was still paying off my student loans on a teacher's salary. "Jessica, you look pale," Caroline said, glancing at me in the mirror while her makeup artist applied false eyelashes. "Are you feeling all right? You better not be getting sick on my wedding day." I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to ease the growing pressure. "I'm fine, just a little tired. I stayed up late grading papers last night." My mother, Linda, rolled her eyes. "Jessica, you really need to learn better time management. This is Caroline's day, and we need you to be present and energetic for the photos." That was my mother. In a nutshell, everything was about appearances, about making sure the family looked perfect for the cameras. She'd been a real estate agent for 20 years, and she treated every family gathering like an open house where potential buyers might judge us based on how well we performed our roles. The chest tightness was getting worse, but I forced a smile. "Of course, Mom. I'll be fine." Caroline's maid of honor, her college roommate Stephanie, was busy steaming the bridesmaids' dresses. "Jessica, your dress is the lavender one on the left. Carolyn specifically chose that color because she said it would complement your skin tone." What she didn't say, but what we all knew, was that Carolyn had chosen the most unflattering shade possible for her bridesmaids so that she would stand out even more in her pristine white gown. The lavender dress made me look like I had jaundice, but I'd learned years ago not to complain about Caroline's choices. As I slipped into the dress, the tightness in my chest intensified. For a moment I felt dizzy and had to grip the back of a chair to steady myself. The sensation was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't anxiety or stress. It was something deeper, something that felt like my body was failing me in real time. "Jessica, hurry up," my mother called. "The photographer wants to start with family shots in 10 minutes. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the pale, drawn face staring back at me. My lips had a slight blue tinge, and there were dark circles under my eyes that concealer couldn't hide. Something was seriously wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything. This was Caroline's day, and I'd been conditioned my entire life to never be the one who caused problems. The photographer, a pretentious man named David who spoke with an affected accent despite being from New Jersey, began arranging us for family portraits in the country club's garden. The late afternoon sun was perfect, he declared, and we needed to capture the golden hour magic before the ceremony began. "Mother of the bride, step closer to Caroline," David instructed. "Father, Put your hand on Caroline's shoulder. Jessica, you're washing out in this light. Step back a bit. Always. Step back. That had been my role in this family for as long as I could remember. Step back. Don't make waves. Let Caroline shine. Even as children, Caroline's achievements were celebrated with family dinners and expensive gifts, while my accomplishments were met with polite approval and the expectation that I should try harder to be more like my sister. As we posed for what felt like hundreds of photos, the pain in my chest was becoming impossible to ignore. It was a crushing sensation, like someone was sitting on my ribcage while simultaneously squeezing my heart in their fist. I tried to take deep breaths, but each inhale felt like fire coursing through my lungs. Jessica, smile, David called out irritably. You look like you're in pain. I forced my lips into what I hoped looked like a smile, but the effort made me feel lightheaded. My father, Robert, who had been checking his phone between shots, barely glanced in my direction. He was more concerned with making sure the country club's bar was properly stocked for the reception than noticing that his younger daughter was struggling to breathe. Dad, I whispered when David paused to change camera lenses. I'm not feeling well. Something's wrong with my chest. He looked at me with the same expression he wore when reviewing insurance claims that he suspected were fraudulent. Jessica, you're probably just nervous about being in front of cameras. You know how you get? Anxious in social situations. That wasn't true, but it was easier for him to believe than to acknowledge that something might actually be wrong. I'd never been anxious in social situations. But my family had created this narrative about me being the shy, nervous one to explain away any time I needed attention or support. The ceremony itself was a blur of pain and confusion. Down the aisle in my lavender dress, I felt like I was moving through water. Each step required tremendous effort, and I was grateful for the slow, measured pace that wedding processionals demanded. The guests probably thought I was being appropriately solemn and dignified, but the truth was that I was fighting to stay. Upright, Caroline looked radiant as she glided down the aisle in her $10,000 dress, her face glowing with happiness and excitement. Tyler, her groom, was wiping away tears as he watched his bride approach. It was a beautiful moment, the kind that would look perfect in their wedding album. I tried to focus on their joy, hoping it would distract me from the growing sensation that something terrible was happening inside my body. During the ceremony, I stood with the other bridesmaids, trying to appear calm and composed while my heart felt like it was beating irregularly. Sometimes it would race, pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. And then it would slow to what felt like a crawl, leaving me dizzy and disoriented. When the minister asked if anyone objected to the union, I had a wild moment where I considered speaking up, not to object to the marriage, but to say that I needed help. But the words stuck in my throat, and the moment passed. Carolyn and Tyler exchanged rings and kissed as husband and wife while I stood there silently dying. The cocktail hour was torture. Guests mingled on the country club's terrace, sipping signature cocktails named after the bride and groom, while I found a chair in the corner and tried to look social. My cousin Mason, who was only 2 years younger than me and had always been my closest ally in the family, approached with a concerned expression. Jess, you don't look good, he said, settling into the chair next to mine. Are you feeling okay? Mason was a senior at UConn, studying pre-med, and he had a better understanding of health issues than the rest of our family. When he looked at me with genuine concern, I felt a spark of hope that someone might actually listen to what I was experiencing. I think something's really wrong, I admitted quietly. My chest feels like it's being crushed, and my heart keeps beating weird. Sometimes too fast, sometimes too slow. His expression immediately became more serious. How long has this been going on? All day, but it's getting worse. I can barely breathe now. Mason pulled out his phone. We need to call 911. Those are classic heart attack symptoms. The words heart attack sent a chill through me, but they also validated what my body had been trying to tell me all day. I wasn't being dramatic or anxious. Something was genuinely, seriously wrong. But before Mason could dial, my Uncle Greg appeared beside us with a stern expression. Uncle Greg was my father's older brother, a man who had built a successful construction business and believed that any problem could be solved with enough willpower, determination. What's going on here? He he asked, looking at Mason's phone. With suspicion. Jessica is having chest pains and irregular heartbeat, Mason explained. I think she might be having a heart attack. I'm calling for an ambulance. Uncle Greg's face darkened. He absolutely will not call ambulances to this venue. Do you have any idea how much your aunt and uncle have invested in this day? Sirens and paramedics will ruin everything. But Uncle Greg, she could be dying, Mason protested. She's 26 years old and healthy, Uncle Greg replied dismissively. Young people don't have heart attacks. She's probably just having a panic attack from all the wedding stress. Aunt Patricia, who had been eavesdropping on our conversation, nodded in agreement. Jessica has always been the dramatic one in the family. Remember when she claimed she sprained her ankle during Caroline's high school graduation? Turned out to be nothing. That ankle had actually been fractured, but the emergency room visit had conflicted with Caroline's graduation party. So my parents had convinced themselves and everyone else that I'd been exaggerating for attention. This is different, I managed to say, though speaking took tremendous effort. I really think I'm dying. Aunt Patricia laughed, a sound that was meant to be reassuring but came across as condescending. Oh, honey, if you were really having a heart attack, you wouldn't be able to sit here talking to us. You're just overwhelmed by all the excitement. Mason looked torn between his medical instincts and family pressure. But what if she's really sick? What if we're wrong? Then she can see a doctor tomorrow, Uncle Greg said firmly. Tonight is about Carolyn and Tyler, and we're not going to let anyone ruin it with unnecessary drama. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The dismissal was final, absolute. I could see in Mason's face that he wanted to help me, but the family had spoken. In the Chen family hierarchy, protecting Caroline's special moments was more important than addressing what might be false. Alarms from the family member who was known for being sensitive and dramatic. As the reception began and guests moved into the ballroom, I remained in my corner chair, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. The pain in my chest was intensifying with each passing minute, and I was beginning to understand that no one was going to help me. Whatever was happening to my body, I was going to have to face it alone. The DJ's voice boomed across the reception hall, announcing that dinner would be served shortly, followed by toasts, dancing. And then the moment everyone had been waiting for, the cutting of Caroline's elaborate 3-tier cake. Looked at that cake, a masterpiece of sugar and fondant that had cost more than my monthly rent, and realized that it was going to be the last thing my family cared about more than my life. The reception hall at Willowbrook Country Club was everything Caroline had dreamed of. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables adorned with those expensive Ecuadorian roses. And the fairy lights she'd insisted on created an ambiance that looked like something from a fairy tale. Guests were seated at perfectly arranged round tables, each one positioned to optimize the view for photographs while ensuring the most important family members had the best vantage points for the evening's festivities. I had been assigned to table 7, strategically placed far enough from the head table that my increasingly pale complexion wouldn't be visible in any of the main photos, but close enough that I couldn't be accused of being excluded. The perfect metaphor for my place in this family. Close enough to be included, but far enough away to be easily ignored when convenient. The crushing sensation in my chest had evolved into something that felt like a heavyweight boxer was using my ribcage as a punching bag. Each breath required conscious effort, and I found myself having to remind my lungs to inflate and deflate. The irregular heartbeat that had started during the ceremony was getting worse, creating a rhythm that felt like a broken metronome. Sometimes racing so fast I could feel it in my throat, other times slowing to what felt like near stops that left me dizzy and disoriented. David, the photographer, was in his element, moving around the reception hall like a predatory bird, constantly adjusting his position to capture what he called authentic moments of joy and celebration. His assistant followed behind him, carrying additional equipment and occasionally repositioning the carefully arranged lighting to ensure every shot met David's exacting standards. I was trying to take small sips of water when a particularly intense wave of pain struck, causing me to double over in my chair. Oh. The movement was involuntary. my body's attempt to find some position that might relieve the pressure that felt like it was splitting my chest in half. Unfortunately, this happened just as David was positioning himself to capture what he later described as the golden hour toast sequence. "Excuse me, David," called out loudly enough for half the reception to hear, his voice dripping with irritation. "Could the young lady in lavender please control herself? You're completely ruining the composition of these shots." Every head at the nearby tables turned to look at me, and I felt my face burn with embarrassment. I tried to straighten up, but the effort sent another wave of agony through my chest, causing me to gasp audibly. "I'm sorry," I managed to whisper, though I wasn't sure if anyone could hear me over the gentle background music and the murmur of conversation. David huffed dramatically and moved to a different angle, muttering something to his assistant about unprofessional family members and people who can't handle their alcohol. The assumption that I was drunk was particularly insulting since I hadn't touched a drop of alcohol all day, partly because I was taking medication for chronic migraines, but mostly because the thought of putting anything other than water into my system made me feel nauseous. My table mates, a collection of Caroline's college friends and Tyler's coworkers, looked at me with a mixture of concern and annoyance. One of Caroline's sorority sisters, a woman named Brittany, who worked in public relations, leaned over with what she probably thought was a helpful expression. "Are you feeling all right, sweetie?" she asked, though her tone suggested she was more concerned about potential disruption to the evening than my actual well-being. "Maybe you should step outside for some fresh air. Sometimes wedding receptions can be a bit overwhelming." Suggestion wasn't entirely unreasonable. The implication that I was somehow emotionally overwhelmed rather than physically ill was frustrating. I'd attended dozens of weddings and family gatherings over the years without ever having any kind of breakdown or dramatic episode. The idea that I would suddenly develop an inability to handle social situations on the night of my sister's wedding was absurd, but it was easier for people to believe than to consider that something serious might be wrong. "I think I might be getting sick," I said, hoping that framing it as a potential illness rather than an emergency might get someone to take me seriously. One of Tyler's groomsmen, a guy named Brad who worked in finance, chuckled and raised his champagne glass. "Don't get too sick before the dancing starts." Caroline specifically requested that all the bridesmaids participate in the choreographed number she's been planning. The choreographed dance was something Caroline had sprung on us 3 weeks before the wedding. She'd hired a professional choreographer to teach the bridal party a routine to one of her favorite songs, and we'd been required to attend 2 rehearsals to learn the steps. The idea of dancing or even standing for an extended period felt impossible in my current condition. Mason appeared at my table, having finished his assigned duties as an usher. He'd been helping elderly relatives find their seats and ensuring that everyone had properly filled out their dinner selection cards. His face was flushed from the exertion, but when he looked at me, his expression immediately shifted to concern. "Jess, you look worse than you did during cocktail hour," he said quietly, pulling an empty chair closer to mine. "Your lips are starting to turn blue." The observation sent a chill through me, because I'd noticed the same thing when I'd checked my reflection in the bathroom mirror 20 minutes earlier. The blue tinge was subtle, but definitely present, and it reminded me of something I'd learned during a basic first aid course I'd taken as part of my teacher training. Blue lips were a sign of oxygen deprivation, a symptom that indicated something serious was happening with either the heart or lungs. "Mason, I'm scared," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Something is really wrong with me. This isn't stress or anxiety, this is something physical." Pulled out his phone again, his pre-med training clearly kicking in as he began to assess my symptoms more systematically. "Can you describe the pain? Is it sharp, dull, burning, crushing?" said immediately, "like someone is sitting on my chest while squeezing my heart. And my heart keeps doing weird things, beating too fast and then too slow." Mason's face went pale. "Jessica, those are textbook heart attack symptoms. We need to get you to a hospital right now." Before he could dial emergency services, Uncle Greg materialized beside our table again, this time accompanied by Aunt Patricia and my mother. The 3 of them formed a wall of family authority that made it clear this conversation was about to be shut down. Mason, we've already discussed this, Uncle Greg said firmly. Jessica is having some anxiety about being in the spotlight, which is completely normal for someone with her personality type. My mother nodded in agreement, her real estate agent smile firmly in place. Jessica has always been sensitive to stress. She gets overwhelmed in large groups, especially when she feels like people are watching her. This characterization of my personality was completely inaccurate, but it had become family lore over the years. I'd always been perfectly comfortable in social situations, but my family had needed an explanation for why I sometimes needed attention or support. So they'd created this narrative about me being anxious and fragile. But Mom, look at her lips. Mason protested, they're blue. That's not anxiety, that's a medical emergency. Aunt Patricia dismissed his concern with a wave of her hand. It's probably just the lighting from these chandeliers. Color temperature can make anyone look a bit off. The gaslighting was so blatant that I almost laughed, except that laughing required more energy than I currently possessed. Here was my cousin, who was studying to become a doctor, identifying clear medical symptoms, and the adults in my family were literally arguing that the lighting was making me appear to have cyanosis. Listen, Uncle Greg said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used when closing business deals. Caroline and Tyler have spent $75,000 on this wedding. The venue alone cost more than most people's cars. We are not going to have ambulances and paramedics disrupting this celebration because Jessica is having some pre-existing anxiety issues. The mention of the wedding's cost was particularly galling because my family had been talking about that. Number 4 months. $75,000 was more money than I made in an entire year as a teacher, and it had become the justification for every decision that prioritized the wedding over anything else. Family members had been expected to rearrange their schedules, spend money they didn't have on outfits and gifts, and now apparently ignore medical emergencies, all in service of protecting the investment that had been made in Caroline's perfect day. What if she dies? Mason asked bluntly, his voice rising slightly in frustration. The question hung in the air for a moment, and I could see various family members processing the possibility. Not the emotional impact of losing me, but the practical implications of how my death might affect the evening's festivities. She's not going to die, my mother said quickly, though she avoided making eye contact with me. She's 26 years old and healthy. Young people don't just die from anxiety attacks. But I wasn't healthy, and deep down, I think my mother knew that. Our family had a history of heart problems that no one ever talked about. Now, my maternal grandfather had died of a sudden cardiac arrest at age 34, but the family had always attributed it to his stressful job rather than any genetic factors. My grandmother on the same side had also had heart problems, but those were dismissed as being related to her weight and lifestyle choices. The truth was that no one in my family had ever bothered to have genetic testing done or to inform their children about potential hereditary health risks. It was easier to live in denial than to face the possibility that we might be carrying genes that could kill us. Please, I said, looking directly at my mother. I'm begging you, I think I'm having a heart attack. Can't we just call an ambulance to be safe? For just a moment, I saw something flicker across her face that might have been maternal instinct. But then she glanced over at the head table, where Caroline was laughing with her new husband and posing for candid photos, and her expression hardened. Jessica, you're being dramatic, she said firmly. This is Caroline's wedding day. Whatever you think is happening, it can wait until tomorrow. The finality in her voice made it clear that the discussion was over. Mason looked like he wanted to argue further, but Uncle Greg placed a firm hand on his shoulder in a gesture that was both paternal and threatening. Len, you're going to be a doctor someday, Uncle Greg said. Part of being a good doctor is learning when not to overreact to minor symptoms. Jessica is clearly emotional about her sister's wedding, and that's causing some physical stress responses. The best thing we can do is help her calm down and enjoy the celebration. The dismissal was complete and absolute. I could see in Mason's face that he still believed I was in serious medical distress, but he was outnumbered and overpowered by the family consensus. In our family, individual medical concerns were always secondary to maintaining group harmony and protecting important events. As the family authority figures moved away from our table, I felt a crushing sense of isolation that went beyond the physical pain in my chest. I was surrounded by people who claimed to love me, but when faced with a choice between my life and a party, they were choosing the party. The DJ announced the dinner would be served momentarily, followed by toasts from the wedding party and immediate family members. After the speeches, there would be dancing. And then the evening's climax, the cutting of Caroline's elaborate wedding cake. I looked across the reception hall at that cake. A towering confection of vanilla layers, raspberry filling, and buttercream frosting, decorated with sugar flowers that looked almost real. It had taken a team of pastry chefs 3 days to create, and Carolyn had insisted on having it photographed from every angle before the reception began. As I sat there struggling to breathe, watching my family laugh and celebrate around me, I realized that this cake was going to be the last thing they prioritized over my life. In a few hours, when the cake was cut and photographed and eaten, I would either be in a hospital bed recovering from a heart attack, or I would be dead. Either way, Caroline would have her perfect wedding photos, and that seemed to be all that really mattered to the people who were supposed to love me most. Part 3. The choreographed dance announcement. The dinner service at Willowbrook Country Club was executed with the precision of a military operation. Servers in crisp white uniforms moved between tables carrying plates of herb-crusted salmon and filet mignon, each dish garnished with microgreens and accompanied by carefully selected wine pairings. The meal was exquisite, the kind of dinner that would normally have me taking photos to share with my teaching colleagues who rarely experience such luxury. But I couldn't eat. The crushing pain in my chest had intensified to the point where swallowing seemed impossible, and the thought of putting food into my system when my body was clearly in crisis felt wrong. I moved the expensive salmon around my plate, hoping to give the impression that I was eating while actually consuming nothing more than small sips of water. My table mates were enjoying themselves immensely, discussing Caroline's dress, the beauty of the venue, and their predictions for what the couple's future would hold. Brittany, the public relations executive, was regaling everyone with stories about celebrity weddings she'd attended through her work, while Brad, the finance groomsman, was calculating the per-person cost of the reception and expressing his admiration for the level of investment Caroline's parents had made. "This has to be costing at least $300 per person," he said between bites of his filet. "When you factor in the venue, the food, the open bar, the flowers, the entertainment." Caroline's parents really went all out. The casual discussion of money made me feel even more sick. Here I was, literally dying while people discussed the financial investment that my potential medical emergency might disrupt. The message was clear. I was worth less than the catering bill. Mason had been forced to return to his assigned table with other family members, but I could see him glancing over at me frequently, his expression growing more concerned each time. He'd tried to approach me twice during dinner service, but both times he'd been intercepted by relatives who steered him into conversations about his college studies and his plans after graduation. As the dinner plates were cleared away, the DJ made an announcement that sent a chill through my already compromised cardiovascular system. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin our evening of dancing, the bride has a very special surprise for everyone. Carolyn has choreographed a dance routine with her bridesmaids to one of her favorite songs, and they're going to perform it for us right now." Reception hall erupted in applause and excited chatter. I'd completely forgotten about the ad. Choreographed dance and my focus on trying to stay conscious. But now the reality of what was expected of me hit like a sledgehammer. Caroline had spent weeks planning this routine, hiring a professional choreographer and requiring all the bridesmaids to attend multiple rehearsals. The dance involved complex steps, jumps, and synchronized movements that would have been challenging for me, even on a good day. In my current condition, attempting to perform this routine would likely kill me. Carolyn appeared at the edge of the dance floor, glowing with excitement as she gestured for her bridesmaids to join her. The other girls, her college sorority sisters and Tyler's female cousins, moved eagerly toward the performance area, their faces bright with anticipation. They'd all enjoyed the rehearsals, treating them like fun girl bonding sessions, and they were clearly excited to show off the routine they'd worked so hard to perfect. "Come on, Jessica," called out Stephanie. "Caroline's maid of honor. It's showtime." I remained frozen in my chair, my body refusing to cooperate with my mind's commands. The simple act of standing seemed as impossible as climbing Mount Everest. My heart was beating so irregularly now that I could feel it skipping beats, creating gaps in rhythm that left me gasping for air. Jessica Caroline's voice cut across the reception hall, and I could hear the edge of irritation creeping in. "We're waiting for you." All eyes in the reception hall turned toward me, and I felt the familiar burn of embarrassment that had characterized so many moments in my relationship with my sister. Caroline had always been the performer, the one who commanded attention and delivered flawless execution of whatever she attempted. I had always been the one who struggled to keep up, who occasionally stumbled or forgot her lines or failed to meet the high standards that Caroline set for family activities. But this wasn't about performance anxiety or stage fright. This was about the fact that my cardiovascular system was failing, and the physical exertion required for this dance routine could literally stop my heart. I tried to stand, hoping that somehow I could force my body to cooperate for just long enough to get through the performance. But my legs buckled immediately. I gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling, my breath coming in short, painful gasps. "I can't," I said, though my voice was so weak that I wasn't sure anyone could hear me over the background music and conversation. Caroline's expression shifted from excitement to annoyance to outright anger in the span of about 3 seconds. This was her moment, the surprise she'd been planning for months, and I was ruining it by refusing to participate. "What do you mean you can't?" she demanded, her voice loud enough to carry across several tables. "We've rehearsed this routine 6 times. You know all the steps?" "I'm sick," I managed to say, though even those 2 words required tremendous effort. Caroline rolled her eyes dramatically, a gesture she'd perfected during our teenage years, whenever she felt I was being unreasonable or difficult. "Jessica, you can't be sick right now. This is my wedding dance. Everyone is watching." The irony of her statement wasn't lost on me. Everyone was watching, which meant that everyone could see how pale I was, how much I was struggling to breathe, how my hands were shaking as I gripped the table for support. But instead of seeing these as signs that something was seriously wrong, they were interpreted as evidence that I was being difficult or attention-seeking. My mother appeared beside the dance floor, her real estate agent's smile beginning to show cracks of frustration. She'd spent 2 years helping Carolyn plan this wedding. She wasn't about to let her younger daughter's issues disrupt the carefully orchestrated timeline of events. "Jessica Marie Chen," she said, using my full name in the tone that had terrified me as a child. "Get up right now and join your sister. You're embarrassing the entire family."
Oh.
The use of shame as a motivator was a classic move in my family's playbook. Whenever someone wasn't behaving according to expectations, they would be accused of embarrassing the family, of letting everyone down, of being selfish and inconsiderate. It was emotional manipulation disguised as moral guidance, and it had been effective in controlling my behavior for most of my life. But shame is a powerful motivator only when the person experiencing it has the physical capacity to respond. I could feel the weight of everyone's expectations, the disappointment and frustration radiating from my family members, but my body simply couldn't comply with their demands. "I think I'm having a heart attack," I said, louder this time, hoping that stating my condition clearly and directly might finally get someone to take me seriously. The words hung in the air for a moment, and I could see various family members processing this information. Not with concern or alarm, but with irritation at what they perceived as an escalation of my attention-seeking behavior. Uncle Greg, who had positioned himself near the dance floor to get the best view of Caroline's performance, shook his head in disgust. "Jessica, this is ridiculous. You're 26 years old. Healthy 26-year-olds don't have heart attacks." "But what if she really is sick?" asked one of Tyler's aunts, a woman I'd never met before tonight, who seemed genuinely concerned about my condition. "She's not sick," my father said firmly, speaking up for the first time all evening about my situation. "She's always been dramatic when she doesn't want to do something. Even as a child, she would claim to have stomach aches when it was time to clean her room." This characterization of my childhood was completely false, but it had become part of the family mythology about who I was and how I behaved. I'd actually been a remarkably compliant child, always eager to please and rarely causing any trouble. But when you need to explain away someone's legitimate needs or concerns, it's easier to rewrite their history than to acknowledge that you might be wrong. Caroline, meanwhile, was growing more agitated by the minute. Her perfect wedding day was being disrupted by her difficult sister, and she wasn't going to tolerate it any longer. "Fine," she said, her voice cold and sharp. "If Jessica doesn't want to participate in my wedding dance, then we'll do it without her. But everyone is going to know that she chose to sit out of her own sister's special moment." The threat was clear. If I didn't perform this dance, I would be forever branded as the selfish sister who ruined Caroline's wedding by refusing to participate in a simple, fun activity. Never mind that I was experiencing what felt like a life-threatening medical emergency. The narrative would be that I was being difficult and unsupportive. But as Caroline and the other bridesmaids took their positions on the dance floor, and the opening notes of her chosen song began to play, I realized that I had reached the limits of what my body could endure. The crushing chest pain, the irregular heartbeat, the difficulty breathing, the blue-tinged lips that Mason had noticed. All of these symptoms were my body's way of telling me that something catastrophic was happening. I could force myself to stand and attempt this dance routine, potentially causing my heart to stop in front of 75 wedding guests, or I could remain in my chair and accept the family's judgment that I was being selfish and dramatic. As I watched Caroline begin the choreographed routine with the other bridesmaids, moving gracefully through the steps we'd rehearsed together, I made a decision that would define the rest of my very short life. I was going to prioritize my physical survival over my family's emotional comfort, even if it meant being branded as the sister who ruined the wedding. Part 4. The viral video threat, the choreographed dance performance, was everything Caroline had envisioned. She and the other bridesmaids moved through the routine flawlessly, their steps perfectly synchronized to the upbeat pop song that had been her favorite since college. The reception guests cheered and applauded, many of them pulling out their phones to record the performance. It was exactly the kind of moment that would generate dozens of social media posts and provide content for Caroline's wedding video that she'd be sharing for years to come. I watched from my chair, feeling increasingly disconnected from the celebration happening around me. The pain in my chest had evolved into something that felt less like crushing pressure and more like a burning, tearing sensation, as if something inside my ribcage was literally coming apart. My vision was starting to blur around the edges, and I was having trouble focusing on conversations or even following the sequence of events happening at the reception. As the dance concluded and the guests erupted in enthusiastic applause, noticed that several people had indeed been recording the performance. Uncle Greg had his iPad out, capturing video from his position near the head table. Aunt Patricia was using her phone to get close-up shots of Caroline's face during the routine. Even some of the guests I didn't recognize were documenting the moment for their own social media accounts. But it was Mason who caught my attention. He'd been recording too, but from his position across the reception hall, his camera had captured not just the dance performance, but also my table in the background. I could see him reviewing the footage on his phone, and his expression was growing more troubled by the minute. Caroline finished her dance with a flourish, spinning into Tyler's arms as he joined her on the dance floor for what would become their first dance as a married couple. The moment was picture perfect, exactly the kind of romantic scene that would look beautiful in their wedding album. But as the couple swayed to their chosen song, a romantic ballad about eternal love and commitment, Mason approached my table. With his phone in hand, "Jess," he said quietly, sitting down beside me, "I need you to look at this video." He showed me the footage he'd captured during the dance performance. While the foreground showed Caroline and the bridesmaids executing their routine, the background clearly showed me slumped in my chair, gripping the table for support, my face pale and drawn with obvious distress. The contrast was stark and disturbing. In the foreground, joy and celebration. In the background, what looked like someone experiencing a medical emergency. "This is evidence," Mason said, his pre-med training evident in how he was thinking about documentation. "If something happens to you tonight, this video proves that you were showing clear signs of distress that everyone ignored." The implication of his words hit me like a cold wave. Mason wasn't just concerned about my immediate health. He was thinking about what would happen after I was gone. He was creating a record that would show the world exactly how my family had responded to my medical crisis. "You really think I'm going to die tonight, don't you?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the expression on his face. "I think you're having a heart attack," he said bluntly. "And I think our family is making a terrible mistake by not getting you medical help immediately." Before I could respond, Tyler's best man, a guy named Cameron, who worked in marketing, approached our table with his own phone in hand. He'd clearly been drinking throughout the evening, and his face was flushed with alcohol and excitement. "Hey, did you guys see the video I just posted of Caroline's dance?" he asked loudly. "It's already getting tons of likes on Instagram. This wedding is going to be all over social media." He showed us his Instagram story, which featured a short clip of the dance routine with various filters and text overlays, celebrating the bride and groom.
Wow.
But what caught my attention was that his video also included a brief glimpse of me in the background, looking visibly ill while the celebration continued around me. "Actually," Cameron continued, "apparently not. Noticing my distressed condition, I'm thinking about posting a longer video on TikTok. Caroline said she wants this wedding to go viral, and the dance routine is definitely viral-worthy content." The casual mention of making the wedding go viral sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with my medical condition. Here was a room full of people, documenting every moment of this celebration, creating a permanent record of the evening's events. If I died tonight, all of this footage would exist as evidence of exactly how my family had treated me during what turned out to be the last hours of my life. Cameron Mason said carefully, "Maybe you should wait before posting anything else. Jessica isn't feeling well, and there might be some family issues to deal with tonight." But Cameron was too drunk and too excited about his social media potential to pick up on Mason's hint. "Oh, Jessica's fine," he said dismissively. "She's probably just tired from all the wedding planning stress." Carolyn mentioned that Jessica has been kind of emotional about the whole thing. This was news to me, since I'd barely been involved in the wedding planning at all. Caroline had made most of the decisions herself, consulting with our mother and Tyler's family, but rarely asking for my input. But apparently, the family narrative about my behavior tonight was already being established. I was emotional and stressed about the wedding, not actually experiencing a medical emergency. As Cameron wandered off to continue his social media documentation of the reception, Mason and I sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing the implications of what was happening. The evening was being thoroughly documented from multiple angles, creating a comprehensive record that would be nearly impossible to deny or rewrite later. "Mason," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "if something happens to me tonight, I want you to know that you were the only one who tried to help me." He looked stricken by my words. "Nothing's going to happen to you. We're going to figure this out." But even as he said it, I could see in his eyes that he didn't believe. He was a pre-med student, smart enough to recognize serious medical symptoms, and he could see that my condition was deteriorating rapidly. The blue tinge to my lips had become more pronounced, my breathing was increasingly labored, and my skin had taken on a grayish pallor that even the warm lighting of the reception hall couldn't disguise. The DJ announced that it was time for the traditional wedding toasts, and Tyler's father approached the microphone to speak about his new daughter-in-law. As he began his speech about love, family, and the importance of supporting each other through life's challenges, I couldn't help but notice the irony of his words. Here was a man talking about the sacred bonds of family, while his new in-law actively ignored their daughter's pleas for help during a medical emergency. The disconnect between the idealized version of family being celebrated in the speeches and the reality of how families actually behaved when faced with inconvenient crises was stark and heartbreaking. My father took the microphone next, delivering a speech about Caroline's accomplishments and his pride in the woman she'd become. He talked about her academic achievements, her successful career, her beautiful relationship with Tyler, his confidence that she would continue to excel in all aspects of her life. He didn't mention me at all, which wasn't surprising since this was Caroline's moment. But the omission felt particularly pointed given that I was sitting 20 feet away, slowly dying while he celebrated her perfection. As the toasts concluded, and the DJ announced that dancing would begin shortly, followed by the cake-cutting ceremony, I realized that I was running out of time to get help. The reception was moving inexorably toward its climax, and my family was not going to let anything interrupt the carefully planned sequence of events. Mason leaned closer to me, speaking in a voice so low that no one else could hear. "Going to try one more time to convince someone to call an ambulance? But if that doesn't work, I think you need to consider calling one yourself." The suggestion that I should take responsibility for my own medical emergency rather than relying on my family to help me was both practical and heartbreaking. It meant acknowledging that the people who were supposed to love and protect me were not going to do so when it mattered most. "My phone is in my purse," I said, gesturing weakly toward the small clutch I'd brought with me. "But I don't think I can dial right now. My hands are shaking too much." Mason looked at my trembling hands and nodded grimly. The fine motor control required to operate a phone was apparently beyond my current capabilities, which was yet another sign that my condition was becoming critical. As the dance floor filled with couples swaying to romantic music, and the photographer moved around capturing candid moments of joy and celebration, I sat in my chair feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. I was surrounded by people who claimed to love me at an event celebrating the bonds of family. But when I needed help most desperately, I was facing the possibility that I would have to save myself. The irony was overwhelming, and if I'd had the energy to laugh, I might have found it darkly funny. Instead, I focused on trying to stay conscious long enough to see whether anyone in my family would choose my life over the perfect execution of Caroline's wedding reception. Part 5. The cake-cutting climax, the moment Caroline had been anticipating for months, was finally arriving. The DJ dimmed the reception hall's lights and turned up the romantic background music as the catering staff wheeled out Caroline's masterpiece wedding cake on a decorated cart. The three-tier confection was even more stunning under the focused lighting. Its hand-piped buttercream roses looking almost real and its gold leaf accents catching the light like jewelry. Caroline and Tyler positioned themselves behind the cake, with Caroline's hand placed delicately over Tyler's as they gripped the silver cake server that had been a wedding gift from Tyler's grandmother. The photographer moved into position, his camera clicking rapidly as he captured every angle of this pivotal moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ announced, "please gather around as Carolyn and Tyler cut their wedding cake and make their first official act as husband and wife." The reception guests formed a semicircle around the cake table, their phones out and ready to capture the moment for their own social media accounts. The excitement in the room was palpable, the culmination of months of planning and thousands of dollars of investment, all leading to this single symbolic act. I remained in my chair, no longer capable of standing, even if I'd wanted to. The crushing chest pain had intensified to the point where each heartbeat felt like a hammer blow against my rib cage. My breathing had become so labored that I was essentially gasping for air, though the sound was barely audible over the celebratory noise around me. As Caroline raised the cake server, pausing for the photographer to capture the perfect shot, I made what I knew would be my final attempt to get help. Using every ounce of strength I had left, I managed to stand up from my chair and take a few unsteady steps toward the cake-cutting ceremony. "Caroline," I called out, my voice weak but desperate. "Please, I need help. I think I'm dying." The words cut through the celebratory chatter, and for a moment, the reception hall fell silent. All eyes turned toward me, and I could see the shock and dismay on the faces of the wedding guests as they processed what I'd just said. Caroline's face went through a rapid series of expressions: surprise, embarrassment, anger, and finally, cold determination. This was her moment, the climax of her perfect wedding day, and she was not going to let me ruin it. "Jessica," she said, her voice sharp with irritation, "you're embarrassing yourself. Everyone is watching." "I can't breathe," I gasped, my hand pressed against my chest. "Something is wrong with my heart. Please just call an ambulance." The photographer, David, lowered his camera with obvious frustration. "Could we please resolve this family issue after the cake cutting? We're losing the perfect lighting, and I need to capture this moment now." It's casual dismissal of what he'd just heard, someone literally begging for medical help, so callous that several of the wedding guests looked shocked. But my family seemed to take their cue from his professional assessment that my medical emergency was merely a family issue that was disrupting the photography schedule. My mother stepped forward, her real estate agent's smile strained but still. "In place, Jessica, honey, you're having a panic attack. Just take some deep breaths and try to calm down." "This isn't anxiety," I said, though speaking was becoming increasingly difficult. "I'm having a heart attack. Look at me. Really look at me." For just a moment I saw something flicker across my mother's face that might have been recognition of how seriously ill I appeared. My lips were now noticeably blue. My skin had a grayish pallor, and I was visibly struggling to remain upright. Even someone without medical training could see that something was seriously wrong. But then Caroline spoke up, her voice cutting and final. "Mom, don't let her manipulate you. This is exactly what Jessica does when she's not getting enough attention. She creates drama to make everything about her." The ambulance arrived at St. Mary's Hospital with sirens blaring, but it was too late. Marcus, the Uber driver who had shown me more compassion in my final moments than my own family had all evening, sat in the waiting room with tears streaming down his face. He gave his statement to the police about finding me collapsed outside the wedding venue, about my desperate pleas for help, about how I had begged him to take me to the hospital instead of home. Dr. Williams, the emergency room physician, delivered the news that would shatter any remaining illusions about what had happened that night. The autopsy revealed that I had died from a massive heart attack caused by arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy, a genetic condition that runs in families. The same condition that had killed my maternal grandfather at 34, though my parents had never bothered to inform me about this family medical history or suggest genetic testing. Meanwhile, back at the country club, Carolyn and Tyler were cutting their elaborate cake, completely unaware that their wedding celebration had cost a life. The reception continued exactly as planned, with dancing, toasts, and photo sessions that would preserve the memory of what they believed was a perfect evening. It wasn't until the next morning that my family received the phone call that would change everything. Detective Rodriguez from the Riverside Police Department contacted my parents to inform them that their daughter had died of a heart attack while leaving their other daughter's wedding reception. The shock was immediate and devastating. My mother collapsed when she heard the news, finally understanding that my pleas for help had been genuine medical distress, not attention-seeking behavior. My father sat in stunned silence, playing the evening's events and realizing that every time I had begged for help, I had been literally dying in front of them. But the real reckoning came when Mason, consumed by guilt and unable to live with what he had witnessed, made a decision that would expose the truth to the world. He had recorded video throughout the evening, initially intending to capture memories of Caroline's special day. Instead, he had inadvertently documented the systematic dismissal of a medical emergency that resulted in death. 3 days after my funeral, Mason posted the video compilation on social media with a caption that would make the story go viral within hours. "This is my cousin Jessica. She died of a heart attack while our family told her to stop being dramatic, because it was interrupting a wedding reception. Watch her beg for help while we chose cake over her life." The video showed everything. My obvious distress during the ceremony, my desperate attempts to get help during dinner, my family's repeated dismissals of my medical emergency, my final collapse as I begged for an ambulance while Caroline worried about her wedding photos. The evidence was undeniable and heartbreaking. The internet's response was swift and merciless. Comments poured in from around the world, expressing outrage at my family's callousness and grief for a young woman who had died surrounded by people who claimed to love her but refused to help her when she needed it most. My parents' reputations were destroyed overnight. My father lost his insurance broker position when the video reached his workplace, and clients began canceling their policies. My mother's real estate career ended when potential buyers recognized her as the mother who let her daughter die for wedding photos. Caroline's marriage imploded within a month. Tyler, horrified by what the video revealed about his new wife's character, filed for annulment. "I can't be married to someone who watched their sister die for a photo opportunity," he told reporters who had begun following the story. The wedding venue faced massive lawsuits for not having medical personnel on standby during events. Photographer's business collapsed. After he was identified as the man who complained about a dying woman ruining his shots, Even the wedding guests faced social media backlash for their failure to speak up when they witnessed obvious medical distress. Uncle Greg and Aunt Patricia became pariahs in their community, known as the relatives who had physically prevented emergency medical services from being called for a dying family member. Their construction business lost contracts as word spread about their role in the tragedy. But perhaps the most devastating consequence was the revelation that came during the investigation into my death. Medical records showed that our family had a documented history of genetic heart conditions that my parents had known about but never disclosed to their children. They had actively concealed information that could have saved my life through early detection and treatment. The criminal investigation that followed led to charges of criminally negligent homicide against my parents for their failure to provide medical assistance to someone in clear distress. While they ultimately received only probation due to the legal complexities of family obligations, their lives were effectively over. Caroline, once the golden child with a bright future ahead of her, found herself unemployable and unmarriageable. The video of her telling her dying sister to stop being dramatic during a medical emergency had made her one of the most hated people on the internet. She lost her high-paying marketing job, her Manhattan apartment, and virtually all of her friends. From wherever I now existed, I watched as the perfect family facade that had been maintained at the cost of my emotional and physical well-being crumbled completely. The $75,000 investment in Caroline's dream wedding had ultimately cost them everything they actually valued: their reputations, their relationships, their financial security, and their peace of mind. The irony was profound and absolute. In their desperate attempt to preserve Caroline's perfect day, they had created a viral documentation of family dysfunction that would be remembered forever. The wedding that was supposed to showcase their success and happiness had instead become a cautionary tale about the devastating consequences of prioritizing appearances over human compassion. Mason, the only family member who had tried to help me, used his experience to become an advocate for cardiac awareness and genetic testing. He established a foundation in my memory that provided free heart screenings for young adults and educated families about the importance of sharing medical histories with their children. The spotlight illuminated Caroline's 3-tier wedding cake, adorned with sugar flowers and gold leaf details. This was the moment she'd planned for 2 years. Caroline and Tyler gripped the antique silver cake server, ready for their perfect photo. I felt my heart failing. The crushing chest pain had become unbearable, and my heartbeat was erratic, skipping and racing unpredictably. My vision blurred as I fought to stay conscious. This was my final opportunity to get help before dying in front of everyone. Summoning my remaining strength, I stood and approached the cake ceremony. Each step felt impossible as pain shot down both arms. "Carolyn," I called weakly across the silent reception hall. "Please, I'm having a heart attack. I need an ambulance immediately." The words shattered the celebratory atmosphere. Wedding guests turned in shock while the photographer lowered his camera, clearly annoyed by this disruption to his scheduled shots. Caroline's expression shifted from surprise to embarrassment to rage. "Jessica, stop it," she hissed, gripping the cake server tighter. "You're embarrassing yourself and destroying my wedding." "I'm not trying to ruin anything," I gasped, clutching my chest. Something seriously wrong with my heart. "Please call 911. Tyler looked concerned and reached for his phone, but Caroline grabbed his arm. "Don't! She always does this for attention. An ambulance will ruin everything." My mother approached with her strained smile. "Jessica, honey, you're having anxiety? Sit down and calm yourself." Mason suddenly pushed through the crowd, phone in hand. "I'm calling 911 now," he announced. "Jessica is clearly having a medical emergency." Uncle Greg intercepted him, grabbing Mason's wrist. "You will not," he said firmly. "This is a $75,000 wedding. We won't have sirens disrupting it because Jessica's having an episode." "This isn't an episode," Mason protested. "Look at her blue lips and cardiac symptoms." Several guests examined me more closely, recognizing something was genuinely wrong, but my family dismissed their concerns. "Mason thinks everything's a medical emergency," Aunt Patricia explained. "Jessica's always dramatic when she doesn't want to participate." Realizing no one would help, I whispered, "I'll call myself." With shaking hands, I dialed 911, struggling to focus as my vision deteriorated. 911. What's your emergency? I'm having a heart attack at Willowbrook Country Club in Riverside. Please send an ambulance. Caroline lunged for my phone. Up now. You won't ruin my wedding with this stunt. I held on desperately, reporting my symptoms before Caroline knocked the phone away. Mason grabbed it, telling the dispatcher, "The family has been preventing medical help. Please hurry." This revelation shocked the wedding guests. Uncle Greg made one last attempt at control. Jessica gets overwhelmed at big events. But as he spoke, I collapsed. My heart finally stopped, and I convulsed on the reception hall. Floor guests screamed. Tyler performed CPR while Mason updated the dispatcher. Caroline stood frozen beside her untouched cake, watching her sister die. Paramedics arrived 8 minutes later, but hours of delayed care had caused irreversible damage. I was pronounced dead at 9:47 p.m. as my body was removed. Caroline finally cut her cake alone, tears streaming, while traumatized guests watched in silence. The perfect $75,000 wedding had cost one life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.